Hi everyone, Dan here. The following episode is an interview with Kindra Neely, author of an excellent new memoir of surviving a mass shooting. Our conversation includes discussion of suicide. If you or someone you know is in crisis, call or text the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. Just those 3 digits, 988.
The way that I dealt with the shooting was the way that I dealt with smaller things that had happened in my life. And those kind of early habits that we have of how we deal with problems and how we deal with emotions might kind of air quotes here work well for those smaller problems and those, kind of smaller, more commonplace difficulties that we go through in life. But then with these big traumatic things, those habits stop working for us because it is too complex and too big of an emotion to bottle away.
Welcome to What's the Big Idea? I'm your host, Dan Carney. If you listen to this show, you might have picked up my love for comics and graphic novels. The medium really speaks to me in its ability to communicate complex and important issues in a way that reaches a wide audience and employs some pretty incredible creativity. I recently read a very important new graphic novel. It's called Numb to This, and its author, Kindra Neely, is a survivor of the 2015 shooting at Umpqua Community College in Roseburg, Oregon. That day in October, a student who was enrolled at the school fatally shot an assistant professor and 8 students in a classroom and injured 8 others. The title of Neely's book comes from then President Obama's comments that day.
Somehow this has become routine. The reporting is routine. My response here at this podium ends up being routine. The conversation in the aftermath of it, we've become numb to this.
Numb to This is both a documentary of the events and an intimate personal account of the human toll of a mass shooting. Neely explores the role of media in covering mass shootings, the stress that such traumas place on relationships, the recurrence of mass shootings in America, and, in the book's most poignant, difficult, and tense scene, Neely's own suicide attempt. Numb to This is an important book for this national moment. And if my intro alone doesn't already have you ordering Numb to This, then our conversation surely will. I want to thank you for taking the time to come on the show. And I wanted to start with a moment in the author's note at the end of the book. You talk about, this is 2020, so almost 5 years later, and you're sitting on a surfboard, and you say you're letting the waves roll, and it hits then. I start crying hard. It's not euphoric joy, it's gratitude. It was fun being alive. I wonder if you could take a minute to talk about the power of gratitude and what you learned about that, because there's a really powerful message about gratitude that really delivers at the end of the book. And what did you learn about gratitude and its power through all of this, through the events and writing the book and just and kind of coming to terms with everything?
I think gratitude really helped me to be grounded in moments that I wasn't grounded. So especially, it was a tool that I learned to use to help combat panic attacks specifically, and to also allow myself to acknowledge the good when the bad seems very, very overwhelming. And I was, slowly kind of having those small moments, especially again, when I was having really, really bad panic attacks, of being like, okay, I'm having this panic attack and this really sucks right now. And everything feels like it's crashing in, and it feels like I'm never going to feel better than what I feel right now. But maybe this time it's just a little bit better than it was last time. Like maybe it's over a little bit quicker, and I can just acknowledge, like, okay, it's nice to just have this moment of reprieve, even if it's not going to last for a very long time. And so that's where that build of that skill started to come from. And then it's really blossomed now into these very kind of quiet moments that I don't think people would really like say are very significant. Like, you know, I talk about being on the surfboard, and although that was like kind of not a very common experience for me, like I was just visiting some friends. This wasn't like a very huge occasion or anything like that. But moments like that, and moments like, sorry, my cat, he of course decides to wake up right now, but moments like that, and other small moments have really blossomed into these just like, yeah, it's really nice to be alive right now. I'm so glad I didn't miss this. You know, not only am I glad that I didn't suffer in the shooting physically, but I'm glad that I survived my, you know, suicide attempt, and that I'm making the choice to stay for these moments.
Yeah, the title of the book is Numb to This, and that, of course, is from a line from President Obama's speech immediately after the shooting. But it's also about you and you sort of losing yourself. And you say that at one point in the book, that you had kind of lost touch with a lot of things in your life, namely your internal emotions and your own sense of what was important to you. What was that like, to realize that you sort of lost that part of yourself and you needed to find it again?
Devastating at the time. And yeah, again, I go back to those feelings of this is how it's always going to be. Just kind of that mindset that things are so bad and they can't possibly change. There was definitely a period of mourning that I had to allow myself to go through, of not being the same person that I was and not being able to go back to that person. You know, who I am now is a much healthier person, and a person that is much better at dealing with their emotions and much more open. But that is a far cry from the person that I was even before the shooting. And sometimes I talk about too that, you know, the way that I dealt with the shooting was the way that I dealt with smaller things that had happened in my life. And those kind of early habits that we have of how we deal with problems and how we deal with emotions might kind of, air quotes here, work well for those smaller problems and those, you know, kind of smaller, more commonplace difficulties that we go through in life. But then with these big traumatic things, those habits stop working for us because it is too complex and too big of an emotion to bottle away.
Yeah, I really appreciate your comment there about the feeling that this is how it will always be. I teach adolescents, and I know that it's a really powerful force and emotion that they can deal with when something particularly hard is happening. It can feel like this is how I'm always going to feel. And it's really important to hear voices like yours who have gone through a journey and reflected on it. What were you like as an adolescent, as a person, and were you an artist, and how did you sort of grow into your art?
I mean, I was kind of the way that I am now, but I think much more of a people pleaser and very, can be very timid with kind of speaking up for myself. But I did not have much of a problem speaking up for other people. But yeah, I was kind of a much more quieter person, much more introverted and kind of in myself, I guess. But I did lots of fun activities, and I had a really good friend group. I think that is kind of rare to have in high school, that I'm still friends with now. A group that is like, all of my friends we're all kind of successful in our own ways. And so yeah, I guess that's kind of what I was like when I was younger. And the art bug, I mean, when I was little, I liked to draw, and have definitely kind of gone through different little art phases as I've grown older. But the art bug didn't really bite me until college. I didn't start really drawing or seeing art as like a potential career opportunity until my second year of community college.
Yeah, and I actually thought that was a really cool message, probably unintentional in the book, though, about letting life kind of come to you. And frankly, the power of community college. You know, I think in this country, we become obsessed with just like finding the right college right out of high school when most people don't really know what they want to do. And you're in community college and you realize that art is for you and you're going to go across the country to art school. And that's, I think, something that a lot of people could probably take heart in.
Yeah, definitely. I think, when I was in high school, I had no idea what I wanted to do. I had like a couple of different interests, and I was like, well, I could go any way and probably be happy. But there wasn't anything that was like passionately calling to me, like so many people talk about. And so I was like, well, I'm definitely not going to go to a 4-year university and spend all this money taking, the kind of basic classes that you have to take anyways until I figure that out. And community college was a great way for me to explore all those different interests and land on one that I didn't even, kind of consider for a while. So yeah, I think it's great to find yourself. And then even when I was at art school, I originally went for animation and then ended up in sequential art, which is the comics and pre-production for movies and TV shows. Which is, kind of different. So there is, power in being a little bit more open and a little bit more flexible when the world is telling you have to know exactly what you want to do and you have to, follow this path exactly, which can be difficult, obviously, for people that grow up in low-income families like myself, but is possible. There's a little bit more wiggle room than they'd like you to believe.
There's a lot in the book about agency, your own agency and survivor's agency, and about who gets to tell the story. You're pretty critical of the media, particularly in the aftermath of the shooting. You say at one point, people talk at us or for us, but no one listens. I wonder if we could talk about that for a bit, how the story at times felt like it was being taken out of your hands, and frankly, how should the media be covering mass shootings and other such tragedies?
Yeah. Gosh, I could go on about this for hours. Like, there's so many parts to it. But I mean, just the experience of having the media, literally swarm and kind of descend upon your town, especially a small town like Roseburg, was incredibly overwhelming. And while obviously I think there's, importance to having media cover events like this, the personal interactions of just not only myself, but other people in Roseburg that I've talked to that are, my friends or other community members, the way that we were talked to, the invasive methods at times were, it dehumanizes the victims, the families, and the survivors. And I don't know if I depicted this super well in the book, but even coming back to the school like a week later, I show one kind of full page spread where there's, media on either side of the road. And there's one road leading into our community college. It goes all the way down to the end. And I cannot stress enough, like when you got down to where the actual school was, you had the street separating the campus. And then on the other side, lined along this like really small embankment of trees, just hundreds of newscasters and people taking photos from across the street and reporting on it, and the spectacle, the like kind of feeling like you're an animal in the cage feeling was awful, was traumatic in itself. And that's not an experience that's unique to UCC. And so I think that newscasters and the media in general, it feels so cliche and it feels very naive of me to say, like, maybe they just need to ask themselves, hey, if you were in this position, would the way that you're acting feel like, would you be okay with people acting that way towards you? It's complicated too, because they get there and when you're responding to a trauma, that in itself is also traumatic. So maybe you're not, always in the right mind space yourself. But there's definitely a greater need for the media to exercise a bit of care and caution, maybe through training. I know that there were several people there that this was their first like job. So that in itself is like, maybe you shouldn't send people that have never done any kind of like professional, newscasting or whatever, to a very traumatic, very volatile scene.
Was there anyone that got it right, you felt? Maybe anyone local, perhaps, that actually knew the UCC context a bit better?
Yeah, I'd say the local newspapers got it right. I show in the book, there's a scene where I'm being taken, pictures taken of me, of me at the vigil with some sunflowers, and I'm kind of laying them down. And was approached immediately after, as I'm like kind of walking back to my family, by several different people from both local and national news. The national people generally kind of shoved like microphones in my face and were like, what were you laying it down for, and stuff like that. But the local people were like, one of them, which was someone that I recognized from the newspaper, who he'd been coming to like our high school to do our, like, we had read a book plays that we would put on to promote reading. And so like I recognized him immediately because he had, I'd been in articles and stuff with him before, and he came up and was very kind and asking permission if he could use that picture for the paper the next day. And, I said yes.
And the news media is in a race, a competition, right, to get the story, to get it out as quickly as possible. And we see this manifested on our phones all the time. And I've thought for a long time that one of the worst things that we can do is have all our notifications on.
Oh yeah.
And this comes up in the book. There's multiple scenes after the Pulse night shooting, for example, where you depict yourself as being almost surrounded by notifications. How did you make it through those times when, beyond the anniversary of the UCC shooting, you were brought back to that moment by other shootings and the notifications, the news, the media just wanting to push as much on us? How did you cope and get through those moments?
Yeah, those moments can still be very difficult for me. And, I'm taken back to the Uvalde shooting. Even that one for me really, really hit hard. It being, a town in Texas where I was born and raised for most of my life up until, like not my first year of high school, but the year before high school. So 8th grade. And also being kind of in a predominantly Hispanic community, which is, when I was living in Texas, I was very much surrounded by Black and Hispanic communities. So that one really hurt, because I really was thinking of like the people that I went to elementary school with, even, and that was devastating. And I don't know if I really cope through them so much as now I have to really, I just allow myself to feel what I feel when I feel them. And sometimes, as much as I hate to say that, that's not very much at all. Like when it comes to certain shootings, unfortunately, there are just so many that some of them I do kind of just let slip by. I don't check the notifications, and I don't check the news articles about them. I kind of stay away from as much as I can. But the ones that I do really, that I have really paid attention to, it's about kind of just allowing myself to feel bad in the moment. I think I've been very resistant to that when I was younger. And it is cliche, but I will say it over and over again. The only way out is through. Like, you kind of just have to sit with the bad and not feel bad about feeling bad, not let the negative emotions about having negative emotions rule the conversation that your brain and your body are having when they're going through that experience.
And how much of going through it was writing the book? Was the book part of the process of going through it, or were you able to create Numb to This because you had gone through it?
A little bit of both. I think there was like a little portion of a hill that I had to get over in order to be able to make the book. But that was a pretty small hill compared to the mountain of actually doing the book. And I feel like I kind of trapped myself into healing a little bit with having the book and pitching it, and and having that be something that I had to follow through with. But it was like still like obviously I did that to myself on purpose, so I was like kind of agreeing to it sort of. But most of doing the book was the bulk of like my healing process. That was my way of making sure that I sat down every day and had to acknowledge that this hurt, or this was great, or this was this made me feel awful, or I was afraid. And it didn't give me a lot of room to kind of futz around and try to ignore it or anything, at least not for very long. I got a couple of little breaks while they were doing editing, but it was very much my like practice of almost like therapy every single day.
It's very cool because you create the book in the book. It's got this very cool like meta layer. Just logistically, I love comics. I love graphic novels, and I'm just very interested in logistically what does a day look like? What does a week look like? What mediums do you work in? How do you go about creating the panels and putting it together?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I love talking about the process of creating comics because it's so different for every artist, but there's like, lots of cool things for everyone individually. So when I was making the book and when I'm working on comics in general, I personally generally start off with just like kind of loose sketches. I'm not really putting them into panels or anything, but they're kind of the immediate scenes or images that come to my mind when I'm thinking about whatever, kind of story bit I'm putting together. And so, along that line, there's lots of notes and stuff on the side of like, if I drew this and then like maybe I'm thinking of something that would look good next to it, or a lot of the dialogue writing. And so that kind of manuscript-ish era is really joint at the hip with the drawing and the writing automatically. And that's not always the process for all comic artists. There's lots that work with, just a writer and then an artist kind of, collaborate on that separately. But for me, because I'm, doing it kind of all of it, I get to work jointly from the start. And in terms of mediums, I do use like a mix of traditional and digital. I generally start off with traditional sketches and drawings on paper and on Bristol board. But when it comes to kind of putting together the comics and the panels and all of the art together, that's mostly done digitally for me. And that's just because I like to futz around a lot with the details and change little things. And I don't want to sit there and, like completely go through the paper with an eraser. How many times I'm changing little things. So yeah, that is kind of my process. And but a fun thing that I think a lot of people don't know is that, at least for me, part of the process is also just making other art that kind of doesn't really have anything to do with comics. So painting in a very like abstract or freeform way where I'm experimenting with color and texture, that's all part of it too, because, if you're thinking of your brain as like your main tool for creativity and for making things, you have to kind of let it function in all these other different ways. That way it can really hone in on that comic process.
It's really cool that you are writing and creating the art. I find that most of my favorite graphic novels are done by teams, and so you have a writer, you have an artist, and I don't know their process. I imagine there's a lot of sort of talking about the ideas and conceptualizing what it might look like and what the text is going to look like. But when you're coming to a comic, are you thinking in images or are you thinking in story text? What's the sort of relationship there between those two?
Oh, it's a bit of both. Yeah, I think mostly visually, kind of at the beginning, but then there's also the element of text. So sometimes I'm thinking more of like, here's the colors and like kind of the scene visually that I want to go with. But then other times I'm like, maybe I'm running through like a dialogue or something in my head, and I'm like, oh, that's the piece, and now I need to find the art to fit that, or to express that thought or idea. So it's a little bit of both.
Why are graphic novels such a powerful, awesome medium? Why are they so? I love that they're really having a moment right now. I feel like in the last 5 to 10 years, graphic novels are starting to really get their due. But what is it about this medium that speaks to all ages and all interests?
I love talking about this. Oh my gosh. Yeah. So my kind of thoughts on this is that, with just prose, with just written literature, words are excellent at being very precise, and they can change the meaning of an entire sentence or the tone of something with just, one word or punctuation change or something, which is awesome and great. But when you're talking about really complex, like emotions and stuff, that's harder to get, and that can be a little bit more wispy. So it's really cool to see graphic novels kind of, I think that they work in that they kind of encompass all of this in a way that's a little bit more accessible for, like you said, kind of all audiences, all ages. People that maybe struggle with things like metaphors and stuff can like get that extra sense of visual with the graphic novel, and so they're able to make more of those connections. The synapses are firing in their brain in ways that they maybe wouldn't just with written prose. And I had a really awesome conversation with my friend Jasmine, who's in the book, and her mom's husband, he or fiance, I don't know if they're married yet, but he, I don't think he's ever I don't think he's ever read a graphic novel before, but he read my book, and he sent her a message talking about how he read through it first, and he just basically whipped through it with just the dialogue. But then he talked about the experience of then going back and looking at the images and kind of connecting the two, and what a cool experience that was for him, and how he got this like whole experience from it, the whole visual, the whole picture of what I was saying.
That's cool. Yeah, when I open a page, I turn the page, usually I move over the images. I kind of take in what's happening, and then I go back and I savor it and read and go slowly. And then if it's particularly good, I'll do it a third time. But I suppose everyone's got their own style. Yeah. I think your book is an excellent example of the power of contrasting panels and frames with text and those without. And the kind of in the center of this book is this really tense, incredibly powerfully drawn scene of your suicide attempt. It's very, it really made an impact on me, and even as I was reading it over and over, it just never lost its power. And I wonder how do you approach something like that, something that's so not just big in your own life, but you're really making yourself so vulnerable to your reader. How did you conceptualize that scene in the book?
Yeah, it was a difficult scene to work on, not only just like emotionally, but just because like I wanted to get it right. I didn't want it to, obviously there's kind of an issue sometimes with the romanticism of mental illness, especially things like suicide. And so obviously I wanted to make sure I was staying away from that, but still wanted to show it in a very impactful way. And I think trying to capture the quietness of the moment when it got to like the really hard part, I had some of the dialogue at the beginning, but then wanted it to kind of fade away. So that way it felt like the reader was sitting in that silence with me for a minute before, then thinking about Jasmine and hearing her and having her call me. But yeah, it was a hard scene, and I'm glad it's been impactful for people. I've had, other people tell me, kind of similar. I'm glad that I seem to have gotten it, at least semi right. But yeah, it was kind of really just about trying to capture that moment and just invite people to sit with the uncomfortableness of it and the the seriousness of it.
Yeah, and that's what it was exactly. It was the scene was almost is almost front loaded by some exposition, and you've got this great description of the way that people usually think of people who attempt suicide. That they plan it, or that they have it in their mind that this is going to happen, and then all text stops, all dialogue stops, and you're just taken through this almost eerie silent scene that you have to sit in. What are some of the things you hope readers will take away from Numb to This?
Well, I hope that, one, they'll feel a little bit seen. I think that there's a lot of teens and younger readers right now who, through social media, are talking about how they don't feel like this issue is being taken very seriously, or that their feelings about it aren't being taken very seriously. So I hope, one, that it just, makes them feel like, hey, there's an adult out there who knows what you're going through a little bit and is there for you and is on your side. But I hope that kind of overall they get the message that, hey, there are, if you have trusted adults in your life, you can talk to them about these very serious, things about mental illness, and also about, your fears around the kind of social climate right now, and especially at schools. And that it's never too late to ask for help. You are never at a point where you can't, that there is always going to be people out there that want to help you. And sometimes you do have to search for it. And that is really difficult and hard, but it's very worth it. And that's kind of what I hope comes through.
Do you think this country is moving in the right direction at all on mass shootings? Do you think we're learning anything?
Oh, yes and no. I think that there's a lot of really intelligent conversations going on that are acknowledging kind of the long-term effects of this. And there are many more people out there that are much more intelligent and articulate than I that are talking about, the reasons why this happens and the things that we can do to help it. But at the same time, there are also very powerful people who are ignoring it. Not even just this problem, but, the causes that are behind it, that influence it. And it can be very scary and disheartening to see people like that talking and saying things, especially on social media, that are so terribly hurtful, not only to people that have been through any kind of gun violence, but through the communities that are kind of at the center of violence in general, that is, being inflicted upon them. So I always want to have I want my positivity to be grounded. I don't ever want to fly off into the sun and be like, everything's going to be fine and we can totally fix this. I do think we can fix this, but I think it's going to take a lot of really hard work. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of people are going to get hurt before it gets better.
What are you working on now? What's the next project for Kindra?
Well, I think I have decided that I'm going to do another memoir about growing up as a queer person in the South and in the Bible Belt, and with fundamental Christianity, kind of taking a lead role on that. It'll be, I think, a little less heavy than Numb to This, and I'm planning on definitely taking more of a humorous role, while still obviously exploring, kind of the seriousness of those topics. But I'm really excited to start working on something new and move forward.
Well, I want to thank you so much for joining me and writing this book. Really powerful, really important, and I'll be promoting the hell out of it because I think people should read it, get it in the hands of as many people as possible.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I think it's wonderful that we get to have these conversations, and I'm honored to have done something important enough to be able to have them.
I'd like to thank Kindra Neely again for coming on the show to talk about her important new graphic novel, Numb to This. There's a moment fairly early in the book. It It's right after the shooting when Neely is still processing the whole thing, and she's working on a kind of a banner of dragonflies to celebrate one of the victims of the shooting. And Neely writes, "Art just felt right. It was a productive and constructive way to express my feelings. It gave me a place to think about the incident without stewing in negativity." It's actually during this scene when Neely understands that art is the direction that her life can go and a direction that she wants her life to go. And that, I think, is one of the great messages of this book, that life goes on and life can get better, even for those who have been through such trauma. I highly recommend this book. Certainly if you're an adult. If you're a teacher or a parent, be judicious about what young people read this book and with what guidance and discussion, because it is a pretty heavy topic. But it is a really important book in a really cool medium, and I recommend it. Numb to This, Memoir of a Mass Shooting by Kindra Neely. And again, if you or someone you know is in crisis, call or text the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. It's just those 3 digits, 988. You can call or text. Thanks for checking out What's the Big Idea. Stay safe out there. Hope your fall, hope your school year, hope everything's going well. As always, Instagram and Twitter @BigIdeaEd. Comments, questions, particularly about Neely, if you want to weigh in on this book, if you've read it. Would love to hear from you there. Take care, everyone.